Alright YouTube, we're back, of course, talking FF7. We have another interview with the boy, Naoki Hamaguchi, this time with EpicGames.com, of course, kind of hyping up the PC release of the game. There's a couple of interesting talking points from this, but the main one is Hamaguchi talking about DLC. Now, he does allude to the possibility of DLC coming out after the third installment for the remake project, but he does mention that there was, at one point or another, plans to put out a piece of DLC for the PC release of Rebirth, which is really interesting. Namely because it contradicts with what we've heard for the last couple of years now, even as far back as 2021, around episode intermission and remake Intergrade. Nomura had done an interview with Famitsu where he'd talked about there not being plans for future DLC. It is the wording was kind of weird, where it's hard to know if he meant after part 2 was done or after the remake project was done they might consider doing DLC. But at least at the time he was talking about there's no plans for more DLC. It was really just going to be episode intermission and that was it. As recent as September of last year, within the marketing for Rebirth, Nomura did an interview with Vandal where he'd said that there was no plans for DLC for this installment, just straight up, right? And then we have now, where 5 days ago, Hamaguchi does an interview with EpicGames.com and says that they were absolutely planning to do a PC DLC for the PC release of the game. How far along did that ever get? Who knows? But the point I've tried to get across on the channel in the past is that in interviews, it doesn't matter if they're saying there's not going to be DLC, because they're just not going to tell us that, because why would they? Why would they want to ruin that surprise, for one? Also, talking about DLC for your single-player game before it's even coming out looks kind of scummy. It looks to me I view that personally as cut content to a certain degree. Your game's not even out yet. We can't even purchase your game in stores yet, and you're talking about DLC coming out for the game. That just looks like cut content to me, because how do you already have that shit planned? So let's top into it. Citing games like Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon Zero Dawn, and The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt as inspiration, a nod to the cultural exchange between Japanese and Western RPGs going back to Final Fantasy's inception, Hamaguchi and his team spent a lot of energy finding the right scope for Rebirth's ambitious new structure. During the first year of the Rebirth project, we were repeatedly making prototypes to define the size of the world map. The key concept of narrowness that's just enough to feel spacious was born out of this process, and we were looking for the perfect size that would make users feel that the world map was spacious, but would also be feasible to achieve from a development standpoint. So we've obviously talked a lot about, kind of the open world nature of Rebirth and kind of the regional maps, and I'll give my thoughts on that quite a bit, that I think that they did a fantastic job. And then maybe in some ways kind of over-delivered, because they did give us a lot to do. You could go back and forth on, what's good or bad about the world intel shit, but they did give us quite a bit to do in the world, and the regions are pretty damn big for the most part, right? They're certainly bigger than what I would have expected, a couple years ago, right? Post-remake, prior to getting into the marketing of Rebirth, we talked a lot about wanting an overworld map for the second game, and then we kind of have to have that shit. And in my mind, it wasn't quite as big as what we got, right? I pictured being able to walk from, Midgard to Calm to the Chocobo Farm to the Mithril Mine, right? But it wasn't to the degree that we have in Rebirth. So in that regard, for me at least, they over-delivered for sure. And the exploration that we have in each region, I like, again, for the most part. I love the Chocobo stop stuff. I love helping the little Chocobos repair their stops. I like the digging with the bunny rabbits and the Chocobos. That stuff's great. Little cache locations could be a little more interesting, because they could find maybe ways to hide the treasure boxes a little bit better, because they're not complicated. You go to an area, you got to look in the top left corner. There's 2 or 3 treasure boxes, and they're never really hidden that well. Those could be a little more interesting. The world intel stuff, as we talked about a lot on the channel, it's kind of okay. The summon stuff could be more interesting. I wish there's more dedicated quests to the summons lore and shit like that, as opposed to just this minigame where you got to hit a handful of buttons in a particular order at a particular time. That's just not that interesting to me. The scanning of the crystals is not interesting to me. The fights you do in each region for Chadley are kind of boring, because a lot of times it's just stagger enemy, beat him in time limit, pressure enemy, right? That's the majority of the fights. There's a few that are a little bit different, but that's the most of them, right? And that could be more interesting in the future in the third game if we do this shit again. Give me more interesting challenges for those kinds of fights, right? But back to Hamaguchi's point of narrowness, but just enough to feel spacious, I think they nailed perfectly, because the game is still linear, right? There's still a lot to do in each region when you get to a new region, but you can't just travel the world. It's not an open world game like a Bethesda game or something, or an Assassin's Creed, where you can just start from here and just walk to the other side of the map, right? There is still a narrowness to the game. As the second volume of a trilogy, Rebirth faces a challenge familiar to classic films like The Empire Strikes Back and The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers. How do you tell a compelling story, complete with all the expected and necessary rhythms of a suspenseful narrative, without a definitive beginning and end? The second title within a trilogy is extremely important, Hamaguchi said. If the second title fails to attract attention, fans will lose interest in the third. Because of this, I believe that the second title tends to be the most beloved within any memorable digital entertainment trilogy. So what they said there's pretty true, right? A lot of times, the second part of a trilogy is, the favorite for a lot of people. And I think in regards to, the Lord of the Rings comparison they used there, that's probably widely true. The Two Towers is considered the best of the trilogy. I think you could definitely see an argument for the first movie being the best as well. Me personally, it's definitely Two Towers. What's kind of interesting, though, with the remake discussion is that I think the majority of the community would agree that Rebirth is better than Remake, right? Kind of overall. Some people would argue the first one's better, but I think, Rebirth gives you a hell of a lot more to do. It's a more fun game to play. But what's interesting with the original FF7 is that the second disc is widely considered to be better than the first disc, right? And so far with the Remake trilogy, we've only got up to the end of the first disc. So really the third game has all the tools to be better than the second game, right? They have the groundwork for what is the best parts of the original FF7. So it's kind of really up to the devs whether or not the third game is better than the second. As long as they don't fuck it up and present the disc 2 stuff in some weird way or whatever, there's no reason that the fans shouldn't also perceive the third game as the best game. Over the past decade or so, there's also been a dramatic change to the environment in which players are discovering new games. When the original Final Fantasy VII was released, they were able to capture much of the game's market's users by releasing a game for a specific console, such as PlayStation, said Hamaguchi. However, in this day and age, an increasing number of users play games from a variety of environments, including smartphones, consoles, PCs, and the cloud, creating a more pronounced tendency that simply launching a game for one environment is not enough to attract a large number of users. As such, it has become more common for many developers to offer their games for multiple platforms, and we believe this trend will continue going forward. Not really a ton to break down from that, of course. It's just Hamaguchi talking about, the multi-release plan going forward, kind of alluding to the fact that, dropping Rebirth and Remake on just one console wasn't the best idea, and that going forward, things will probably change, and that's probably why you're seeing Rebirth come to PC in less than a year. The next section, they talk about mods for, the original FF7, the mods for Remake and stuff, and then talk a bit about mods for Rebirth, and Hamaguchi specifically talks about inappropriate mods. While the team has no plans for official in-game mod support, we respect the creativity of the modding community and welcome their creations, though we ask modders not to create or install anything offensive or inappropriate. Hamaguchi's talking to you specifically, yeah, you right there watching this video. Not to install, topless Tifa mods, or, pantsless Barrett mods with this big black dick. No, I can't say that, fuck. It's kind of funny that he even addressed it at all, because that just comes with the territory, dude. You're dropping your game on PC, there's going to be mods. And if there's going to be mods for a game, there's going to be nude mods. 100% of the time. No matter what. Somebody's going to make a topless mod for everybody. A pantsless mod for everybody. Be fully nude, dick swinging, titty swinging everywhere. It was already going to happen anyways, but with Hamaguchi actually addressing it within an interview means it's going to happen even more. There's going to be, it's like a challenge now. It's like, you don't want me to do it, so now I'm going to do it. Maybe secretly that's his goal. Maybe that's why he said it, because he wants y'all to do that shit. And I don't blame him, because I want it too. So this right here was the real interesting bit from this interview for me. We did have the desire to add an episodic story as a new DLC to the PC version, he admitted. But with limited resources, Hamaguchi decided that finishing the final game in the project as quickly as possible was the highest priority. However, if we receive strong requests from players after the release regarding certain matters, we would like to consider them. So right there confirming that they are open to the idea of doing DLC after the third game. Now, what that would be, I don't know. If the fan demand's high enough, they're down to do it. But also confirming that there was plans at some point for a piece of episodic DLC for the PC version. Now, his quote specifically seems to imply that it might have been only for the PC version. I don't think they would do that, but that's kind of how that sentence is read. It's not technically unheard of, considering that they made, PS5 exclusive DLC for Remake. You had to buy a PS5 to play that PC DLC. So it's not unheard of that they could potentially do a PC DLC that would be for PC only, so you gotta rebuy the game to play that PC DLC. It obviously piss off a lot of people, including myself. I would definitely not have bought that. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they wouldn't have done that, just because it could be like a misquote from people writing the article or something, I don't know. But I am very curious about what that episodic DLC would have been, right? Would it have been the Vincent one we've been talking about for a long time? Would it have been Vincent and Sid? Would it have been like a PC DLC that's like post-Rebirth leading into the third game? I don't know, but I wish you'd be a little more open about what that potentially would have been. As I've talked about before on the channel, I kind of feel like a Vincent DLC is sort of necessary, just because I don't know when we're going to get time for his backstory in the next game, right? Because like with Rebirth, you got like dedicated like chapters or locations for each character, like Corel for Barrett, obviously, and like Cosmo Canyon for Red 13. In the next game, we're going to have Rocket Town for Sid and Wutai for Yuffie, but where's like the Vincent story come in, right? When do we dedicate like a whole chapter or a whole hour of the game to Vincent? I just don't know exactly when you do that, because like Nibelheim would be a good spot for that, I guess, but we kind of already went to Nibelheim, so do we go back to Nibelheim again? I don't know. I suppose you could kind of like sprinkle Vincent's story throughout the third game, just because we're going to be traveling the world. And he obviously has a history with the Shinra Company, doing missions for them with the Turks and stuff like that, so maybe as we travel the world, we learn more about Vincent, and as we come across the Shinra employees like the Turks and like Hojo and all of them, maybe we get backstory there or some shit, I don't know. Also, since there was plans at one point in some way for them to potentially do a PC DLC for Rebirth, I don't think it's like entirely off the table that happens at some point, right? We still have a couple of years until the third game comes out. I know a lot of people don't want them to do DLC because they want them to get to the third game as quick as possible. But the fact that there was plans at some point, however far that ever got, like maybe it could happen. I'm also very curious about that post Part 3 DLC, like what that would be, because they do say that if the fan demand is like high enough, they would do it, right? But they already have to have something in mind, right? If they're already considering doing some sort of DLC after the third game, like they already have to have an idea of what that would be. like, I would assume it's obviously something that would take place post FF7, right? But do you do like some sort of brand new story that kind of adds to the lore that we've never had before, or do you do like kind of like On the Way to a Smile or something like that that's like post FF7 leading into Advent Children? Do you do Advent Children as a DLC? I don't know. And now with FF7 Rebirth released on PC, Hamaguchi's team can finally put it behind them and work full bore on the highly anticipated sequel. A sequel that not only promises to match Rebirth's scope, but surpass it entirely, just as Rebirth one-upped Remake. Our development team is in full force, said Hamaguchi, and you'll be able to freely travel around the world map on the Highwind Airship in the third title of the trilogy. Thank you for your patience, and please look forward to the next installment. And that's pretty much it for the interview. That's kind of everything that I found discussion-worthy. Like, we try to cover, you know, either new information or things that are interesting to talk about. And there's quite a bit to this interview we didn't read, but I didn't think it was necessarily video-worthy. But of course, pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on the potential for DLC for Rebirth and or the third game? What are your thoughts on, you know, Hamaguchi and nude mods? Is he just trying to bait you guys into making nude mods for him? Because that's what I'm thinking. Either way, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.